much for coming, and welcome. As I said, it's the third of our 4-reading semester, and it's actually the fifth reading that is part of a theme that we've been working with since the fall, and that is the 50th commemoration of the war in Vietnam. And my colleague Wayne Carlin, who couldn't come tonight because he had back surgery recently, and but he's an incredible person, not only as a writer and as a teacher, but as an organizer. And he's been able to bring writers here to the college who have addressed the war from many different perspectives. Last week, as a matter of fact, in Leonardtown, we had husband-wife authors who came to Leonardtown to talk to the audience about what it was like to serve in the Vietnam War, as an aviator. And then the wife, Patience Mason, talked about what it was like to have to deal with the aftermath of war and PTSD, and that Bob Mason suffered as a result of his service in Vietnam. And that's a very resonant topic, given what we're going through now with this whole new generation of veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. So we think that in many ways this is an important series, not only as a marker of history, but as a reminder that, as we heard earlier, that the wars never end for a lot of people. So this evening's author, Teresa Mei Chuc, has come to us from California to give us to read from poems that in some way capture the aftermath of war. I'll let her tell her own story, not to worry, but it is another angle, it's another perspective that we think is important for people to have. The more perspectives you have, the fuller the picture you get. So I'm so delighted to welcome Teresa here this evening. I think you'll really enjoy her poetry, as a number of students did this afternoon at an author roundtable. But the final thing I need to say is that my colleague Rachel Heinhorst, which by just a coincidence, happens to have gone to Goddard with Teresa, the writing program at Goddard. She was going to be here tonight. She couldn't be here, and she was going to introduce her friend. And so Rachel asked what I'd like her to do, and basically asked her, the reason I thought it would be good for her to introduce her friend is the personal connection. And so what I'm here to do this evening is to read Rachel's introduction of Teresa, okay? So if you'll bear with me. Teresa and I, that is Rachel, met at Goddard College. She was entering her second semester, a G2, and I was part of the new crowd, a G1. Both of us still freshly entering the transformative experience of becoming a writer. During the first meeting with our shared advisor, our group was asked about current obsessions, the things we find ourselves writing down the most. We would go around the room, around the circle, presenting and explaining. And when Teresa's turn came, her response was trees. Her interest was learning species, location, and their longevity and ability to symbolize a great mystery. Later, alone in my room, I thought about the people I had just met. I thought about Teresa, her long hair, her voice, her vision. On her personal webpage, Teresa's poem, Names, takes me back to that day of meeting her, that day of introducing and finding where to fit in. In the poem, Teresa points out another great mystery of life, the giving and taking of names, search and discovery, when finally a fruit learns to love its juice. I knew the day I met Teresa that she was someone to listen to admire, to learn from. Her questions and concerns of the human experience captivated me and are now offered out for others to share. Her book of poems, Red Thread, invites readers to share Teresa's self-discovery of self, of family, of history. We meet the speaker before birth, before being able to see devastation when, quote, her amniotic fluid was imprinted with airplanes dropping bombs and screams and fire. This was the war in Vietnam. This was the world Teresa took her first breath in. Teresa's poems begin there, as innocence placed in battle. And it is this innocence of human life that is experienced through her poems. It is not just that we hear the effects of the war, but that we hear the effects on the human spirit. This is what runs through Teresa's poems, even as she writes for her son who, quote, twists and turns toward the light. It is discovery that Teresa examines. It is a history that stops us, that makes us want to learn more and more. It is discovering the relationship love has with endurance. This book of poems adds layers to the mystery of what it means to be alive. Please join me in welcoming Teresa Mei Chuc.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm so honored to be here, and it means so much to me, this event. And I thank the College of Southern Maryland and Wayne and Neil, and everyone, for your support. Immigration. It is October, when the winds of autumn blow strong in the Pacific. There are over 2,000 of us, sardines, barely human and starving. We sleep on the floor and wash ourselves with seawater. People are sick. When someone dies from sickness, she or he is wrapped in a blanket and tossed overboard during a Buddhist chant. I was only 2 years old and cannot recollect the dying next to me, nor can I recollect my constant coughing, nor can I recall seeing my mother's worried countenance as she contemplated our future, how my constant crying made her want to jump overboard. Cockroaches. A proposal by someone to my mom after the Vietnam War. Why don't you sell your baby? You don't have anything to eat. A response by my 4-year-old brother. No, don't sell my sister. There are lots of cockroaches for us to eat. When I returned to the country 18 years later, I saw them, large, brown, shiny tanks on the wall. Evidence of my brother's love for me. The bomb shelter. When bombs are exploding outside, it means that there are implosions. Vibrations travel through liquid and air. My amniotic fluid is imprinted with airplanes dropping bombs and screams and fire. In the bomb shelter in Saigon, my father teaches my 2-year-old brother French. Je m'appelle Chuc Nai Dat. Je m'appelle. My father, after the fall of Saigon in 1975, I was born shortly after that, and when my mom was pregnant with me, my father had to report to re-education, where a Viet Cong prison, and he stayed there for 9 years. And so then my mother took my brother and I, we fled the country. We were in the boat for about 4 months. And we came to California, and after 9 years, when relations between the US and Vietnam were a little bit better, they started releasing the prisoners of war, and that's when my father was released. So that was the first time I saw him, when I was 9 years old. And this poem is about him. not worth a bullet. A bullet is made of copper or lead. Gunpowder is poured into the case. The firing pin hits the primer at the back of the bullet, which starts the explosion. Altogether, the bullet and the case are typically about 2 inches in length and weigh a few ounces. My father said that the Viet Congs told him and the other prisoners while in re-education camp that they were not worth a bullet. They would work for the Viet Congs and then die. A bamboo tree is smooth, long, with roots that hold the earth with the strong grip of green knuckles and fingers. They are used to build houses, fences, etc. A bamboo tree can weigh 60 pounds or more and be 20 feet tall. The prisoners were forced to walk barefoot up the mountains and carry bamboo back to the camp. Due to the weight of the bamboo, they were only able to carry one at a time. Vietnam ghost stories. Ghost-like beings roam, carrying the bones of the dead, their steps heavy with the weight of fields, and the dead too. Stories mother tells of the ghost with a long tongue that licks dishes at night. Agent Orange. It is difficult to be alone without a mother's touch, in a crib like a baby, except one is not. A son taught to live with a thirst for a mother who loves her child, though one of his legs is too short, the other too long. He sits, arms bent and limp, but do not avoid him. He wants to interact. His swollen eyes and misshapen head leans back. In a dream, mother holds him close, as if by her embrace alone, she will somehow right the wrong. The chemical traveled through her placenta to the womb where small limbs that needed to form couldn't, where the tiny body, the size of a fist, no longer knew what to do. It was named for the orange band around each 55-gallon drum. Orange as a sunrise that permeates one's soul, how its rays cover the sky and the earth with a deep orange, rising as those bodies also rise. This poem was written for my son. Photosynthesis. How can I convince you that you do have chlorophyll, that you can take the sun's energy and turn it into sugar, produce something sweet inside of you, take the waste people breathe out and make it into something that will keep you alive, that will keep those around you alive, create oxygen. Why do you say that this metaphor doesn't work? That you don't have the powers of a plant, that nature didn't intend you that way? Look how you twist and turn towards the light. Napalm and all the variations of the names still being used. Quote by T.S. Eliot. The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. The best containers for fire are made of metal, glass, or stone, but this fire is too hot, too large, too targeted to be contained. It was made to spread wildly, to stick itself onto human skin, sear tissues, muscles, organs. This fire was made to burn people alive. This fire was not made to be put out. I spread my heart over half a century, across thousands of miles and many countries, over the victims' burned ashes and still burning, over white phosphorus, carbon monoxide. Let my heart hold this bomb. Let my arteries and capillaries wrap around it, keep it in place. When I first saw Daddy, he was like an Egyptian cat, skinny, foraging, and stern, just released from a Vietcong prison. He told us he hated the color red. 16 years later, he wears a red sweatshirt and smiles, the pin tip opening in his heart enough to let in a driblet of red. In praise of emptiness, I am looking for what's not there, that space we look through, the curve of a bowl, a window, blankness on paper, the smooth white between words, between lines, what is not said, what is not done, the hollow in a bird's bones. When someone looks at my palms, it's as if I'm holding nothing but the world. Vietnamese globe. In Vietnamese, the word to live is a circle. A question mark rests at the top and a comma to the right of the question, except the question mark has no dot at the bottom, so the curve is like the curve of a cane where the hand grips, or a squiggle of hair from the head. It is a beautiful word, a painting, round as a ball, and at the summit of this living, one wonders and pauses. The earth is shaped like this word, circling, cycling, carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, water, sediments. A bird with a warm wiggling from its beak will eventually become origin. My mouth opens wide and spherical to sound this Vietnamese globe. I'm going to read some new poems that aren't in the book. I'll start with this one. I write about other wars as well, and this is more current. It's called Depleted Uranium. The water runs a neon color in the village. All the villagers know why the babies are born dead and deformed. Others say there is no proof it was the war. Sometimes truth can only be understood. The father carries the little body wrapped in a blanket. She will be buried with a wooden grave marker, her name inscribed with a knife. There are coffins that are only 6 inches long. If you place your hand inside, it will fit. Violin. When my father kicked my violin against the stove, there was a crash, and the wood carved so lovingly cracked with the force, splintered away from the hole into silence. I was about 12 years old then, remembering my father, the war, his anger, the broken neck of the violin, the collapsed bridge, severed sound vibrations, the arc of the instrument's shoulder I once held in my hand, and the empty curving space that was the window to the world. I am thinking of the trajectory of circles, bombs, my waist, a wanting and needing to let go. The decade the rainforest died, the deer did not stop running. Leopards climbed into trees that could not hide them. The Duglanger and the white-cheeked gibbon cursed at the metal gods we flew, raining on them as they burned from napalm. Elephants choked on the smoke of gunpowder and poison, their steps a strange rhythm as they tried to fly. The thunder of bombs echoed the steps of elephants. Tigers exploded as they stepped onto landmines. In a forest covered with leaves dead from Agent Orange, fallen trees, and decomposing bodies of animals and people, the earthworms were washed away in monsoons with soil that could no longer grab onto roots. The Javan rhinoceros and the wild water buffaloes that were still alive wandered aimlessly, and wary with M16s and AK-47s, we marched quietly and steadily, not knowing why we were killing each other. A little note about the poem. For 10 years, the U.S. Air Force flew nearly 20,000 herbicide spray missions in order to destroy the forest cover as well as agricultural lands in key areas of southern Vietnam. Mekong River. Today's flowers let me inside into their vase-shaped bodies. Today, I swim this river with its fish and turtles and crocodiles, and I know the river does not need a name. There are no memories of dead bodies floating, bloated, lonely, or of massacres. Today, I do not feel the blood of the dead seep through my skin's pores as I swim the sacred river water of my childhood, my hair wet. The sun sparkles around lush green rainforests and jungles unkilled by defoliants, stretching out their 70-million-year-old arms as they yawn. A Duglanger monkey peers out from behind leaves, its orange hair another sun. Today is bright and hot and tropical. The palm leaves sway, and people in their boats with baskets of fruits and vegetables and talk float like a leaf along the current. A woman sits at the end of a boat full of freshly cut bananas, her knees to her chest, wooden paddle in her hands. She steers and stirs the river. So currently, I'm sure you know, in Vietnam, the people are still feeling the effects of Agent Orange in the water system, and children are still being born deformed or dead. And another issue in Vietnam are the unexploded landmines, the UXO. This poem is called The Gambler. The metal rod she holds is her wand. The deck is more than 52 cards. Her suits, bombs used on both sides of the war, M14, Dap Loi Min Moi. She walks in the wild fields seeking the invisible, bringing it to the surface in a strange beauty of smoke and explosion. The wager is her life, or a limb, the shovel, a tongue that lifts the crumbling earth to reach an unexploded landmine. She spreads out the dirt beneath her hands like cards. I think this will be my last poem. And this one, it's about our current war as well. Pencil. Quote, in spite of everything, I shall rise again. I will take up my pencil, which I have forsaken in my great discouragement, and I will go on with my drawing. Vincent van Gogh. A missile is shaped like a pencil. Its long, slender body and pointed end creates history. A girl walking down the street a few steps ahead of her sister and friend, two medics who were trying to help injured people, the parked ambulance, all were annihilated by the same weapon. Above, drones, silent, unmanned planes, a metal, predatory bird that shoots a missile with precision, identifying the colors of a shirt, the features on a face, the shape of a nose, the color and length of a mustache. In a room far away, in another country, a man sits at a desk and looks at a screen. He strokes his thick, dark mustache as he carefully contemplates, then pushes a button. There is a charred hole in the ground where the girl once stood. There are pencils that write and erase, so that there is nothing to be read on the page blank as the desert sky, blank as the smooth shell of a drone. There is a family drinking mint tea in a living room. The man holds a cup to his lips. The glass touches his mustache. A silent bird hovers above. In a split second, everyone is dead. The house is in rubbles, arms, legs, splattered organs among broken concrete. Soon, there will be no trace. Thank you. My experience with Vietnam were through my parents, and especially my dad coming back from prison with PTSD, and that affected me very directly in terms of the violence that I grew up in at home, and coming to terms with that and doing the research on the history of Vietnam, and also from stories that my parents told me about our family, and that was all part of very necessary process for me in order to heal from this. And when I returned to Vietnam in '96, actually, I went to visit my mom was adopted, and her adopted parents, she was adopted when she was a little baby. So her adoptive parents were like her real parents. But after the war, they were stuck in Vietnam. So my grandma there, my mom's adoptive mother, took care of me when I was little. When I was a baby, she would carry me on her back. After the war, it was very difficult for my mom because my dad was in prison, and my mom was selling soybean juice on the street while my grandma was taking care of me. So when I returned in '96, I went to see her again. That was my goal, because my grandfather, my mother's adopted father, had already passed away. And so at that time, I really wasn't ready to explore the war and see that aspect of things. Seeing my grandmother was very emotional experience for me, because I was really sad that I didn't get to grow up with her, and the way she was living in Vietnam, because my mom cared a lot about her and would have taken care of her, but she was kind of there on her own, and it was really sad. I was happy to see her again before she passed away shortly afterwards. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure. Okay, thanks. She did, actually. She did adopt other children, and that was something she did. She adopted several. One of her adoptive sons, It was really horrible, actually. He was really horrible. He would tell my mom that, you know, kind of blackmail her. And from there, and this was one of the reasons why I was really sad that she wasn't able to come, because he would actually say if my mom didn't, my mom had saved enough money to like build so that her adoptive parents could have a little home there. And what he did was he gambled and drank it all away. So when I visited my grandma, she lived in a space literally like just this small. I barely squeezed in, and it was just her bed, and she lived in a space so small, and also, I mean, he threatened to take them into the forest and chop off their legs, and it was just not good. So when I went back to Vietnam to visit her, actually my parents were really worried and didn't even want him to know that I was there. Yeah. Yes.
Growing up, was your brother protective of you? And also, how did the same things that you went through, how did it affect him?
Well, the first question, he was protective in some ways, but we butted heads a lot too. So when I found out about that he stuck up for me at that time, it really touched me. And I think he experienced things a little differently. That's really interesting. I think because his relationship with our father was different from my relationship with my father. It seemed like my father directed his anger on me for some reason in terms of his PTSD, like having a knife thrown at me for using my left hand, being chased with an axe, you know. I mean, he chased me with an axe saying he was going to kill me, and it's because I didn't wash the dishes well. And it was kind of really, traumatic on my part. But it seemed like my brother didn't experience the same things. And I think maybe partly because he's a boy. He's a male, and I'm female. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so for me, I kind of felt like in order to heal from my traumatic childhood experience, I had to explore the war and forgive my father and forgive the U.S. and the Viet Congs, to find some peace within myself, and also to document our history. But I think because my brother didn't have that experience, it doesn't seem like he feels like he needs to do that. When I was little, I always wanted to write a novel, but for some reason, I just can't. I would start writing a novel, and then it would become creative nonfiction, and then my prose would start turning into little prose poems or little pieces, and then I think partly it's the way my mind functions. It's I didn't really choose a form for it. It kind of chose its own expression, and I think also in terms of writing, I have a shorter attention span, so so small pieces worked, and I think the way I saw things in terms of the moment and how to convey that moment in its the energy around that moment, I think in prose it would have been more diluted. Though some of the pieces like Immigration and Cockroaches did initially begin as a prose poem, and but I think it wanted, the energy wanted a different form so that it could, because one of the things when I write, I try to convey my emotions in the poem, and I think that worked better in poetic form. Yeah, I kind of, I have a second book coming out from Foothills Publishing later this year, and some parts of it, I did really kind of, in a way, wanted it to be over, but then I learned about tiger cages. Then I learned about, you know, the environmental effects of, and these things touch me so deeply that, you know, I have continued to write about them. Or my second book does explore other wars more, and also the environment. There are more poems about the environment, like plastics on the environment, and so I think there are different subjects that I'm expanding, but there's just so much ground to cover in terms of on the subject matter. I'm working on poetry, mostly. Yeah. Oh, I do have another book coming out later this year from Foothills Publishing, and it explores some different new wars, like some of the poems I read about the drones, and I have the last poem in that collection is called The Guillotine, and actually that poem will be going online in June, so from Bridal Path Press. So I have a lot of work online as well from my new collection, but I write poetry mostly, some essays once in a while. My father, it took him about a decade to begin to heal. And I think the first time I saw him really smile was when he held my first son in his arms. And I think it was because he missed my entire childhood. Well, a big portion of my childhood, and I have an older brother, 3 years older, so he missed my brother's childhood too. And so I think that was a joy to him, and that was when I started seeing the beginnings of healing. And also, I talked about this earlier with some of the students in the round table, that I think he also likes to plant things, garden, and like fruit trees and planting seeds. And I think his work with the earth and connecting with the earth and growing things really did contribute a lot to his healing. Sometimes I still see once in a while a spark of the PTSD, like sometimes he'll just be angry for no reason, or seemingly no reason, or something very small. And I think part of the work I did in trying to understand what he went through, it helped me to understand him, so to where he's coming from when that does happen. And so he's healed a lot, and he's a great grandfather, very gentle and kind, and yeah. Thank you.